Star Trek The Next Generation. When it came out, my father was if I remember right, he was excited about it, and I was about 4 years old when it debuted. I might have been 3, actually. And so I began watching it from the very beginning, but it probably wasn't really until about the end of the second season that I really started watching it. So probably, it felt like I was watching it in real time as the episodes launched, but as they debuted. But I didn't, because what it was we had taped the entire first season on VHS. And so when I was 4 and 5 years old, I would rewatch that tape all the time. Meanwhile, season 2 and 3 were happening. So I always thought that I saw it debut, and I remember the episodes from it debuting, but I probably remember the episodes from rewatches. But one thing I definitely remember, too, are the early episodes. Like, I remember the announcer guy, previewing the next episode. Like, I remember them saying, "Next week on the episode of Star Trek, Lieutenant Yar must blah, 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 blah." And then they'd be like, "You'll have no vaccine and no Lieutenant Yar." And, of course, that was the episode... That was like actually a terrible episode. That was the one, oh God, what is that one? People don't like it because they call it like a racist or something episode or stereotypical. I don't know, whatever. Maybe it was, I don't care. It just wasn't a very good episode to me. It's like one of the worst episodes because I found it boring. That's why I didn't like it. But we'll get to that episode later. Now we're talking about Encounter at Farpoint, which as a kid, it always felt like I didn't, I liked it. I loved it as a kid. I was mesmerized by it, and we're going to talk about that episode. One of the things really quickly, again, is if you watch Star Trek The Next Generation, you'll notice the first couple seasons I actually still like the first couple seasons, but they're so different because they're still very 80s. They have a lot of 80s music. They have a lot of cheesy synthesizers. The tone of the show is just different. Once they moved into the 90s, or even, by 1990, 1989, it sort of started to get into the 90s and more contemporary. And, seasons 1 and 2 were still kind of clinging a bit to the identity of the original series. So you do notice that a lot in this, that there's a lot of language and mimics of the first show and the original series. I like the way the show starts. Of course, the theme song, the opening, I love the spaciousness and the sci-fi sort of astrology, wonder opening of The Next Generation. I know it's music that they used in the original movie, but it works great here, especially when the organs and the synthesizers are added to the beginning of the show. I really enjoy that sort of spaciousness, ambience, and sort of, I don't know, kind of ominous wonder that I get from it. So I really do love the opening. Then when Captain Picard is seen here in this opening shot, in the dark as he walks into frame, as a kid, I might have seen a few episodes of Star Trek, the original series, but it didn't quite catch my eye. But what I did watch simultaneously with The Next Generation were the original series movies. And as a kid, I did favor the Next Generation TV show. And I did wonder why the movies and things seemed a little bit different. I didn't quite understand, different time periods and things like that. But I always knew Kirk and Spock and McCoy, and I always liked the movies. But, this ended up being the show that I really loved more than anything. The original series did look campy, and I was too young to understand some of the great messages in the original series. So I really connected with The Next Generation, obviously. And I think a lot of people still do that with whatever Star Trek they see first. They end up liking, and if it's more contemporary, it works better always for everybody. So the opening shots of Picard, then he gets onto the bridge, and, he's speaking very almost... robotically. He's new to the ship. He just arrived on the ship, and I love that they're waiting to catch up with the rest of the crew, and that's sort of when Q shows up almost right away, I believe. I liked the idea of a sort of an alien, showing up to say, like, you humans, you think you've advanced and everything. And I also, this was really cool because as a kid, I didn't fully understand how we advanced in the future and how this show looked upon humans and everything. So this really added a lot of context and exposition about Starfleet and the future and how humans are different than now. So as a 5 and 6 year old, I could kind of grasp a little bit of that. Oh, we've really changed and things are way different in the future. A lot of people, say that they don't like this episode or say that they don't like, but I think one of the problems for me, or for me reviewing this is, I grew up with it. So if you don't have the nostalgia for the show, that is something you're going to miss. You know what I mean? So if you don't have any nostalgia for the show and you watch some of the really good episodes later on in the seasons and you start to get to know the characters later on in the seasons and you decide to go back and watch the first season, you are kind of like, wow, this show was way more skin and bones or way more bones than anything in the first season. Worf is very one-dimensional, nothing yet. But all these characters build up to something great, as opposed to nowadays, where I feel like in Star Trek nowadays, everyone is just awesome right from the beginning, and you don't even really get a chance to learn who they are or for them to grow or anything like that. It's just like, I'm awesome. I fly the ship. I'm the best ever at doing that. It's not like that here, really. They tell you who they are, but they grow, they change, they advance. So you really get to see that, and part of it's maybe by accident as the show begins to decide where it wants to put people, but it kind of works in the story as well. Like, with Geordi being, a pilot in this episode with kind of like that secondary command. In the first season, Geordi is kind of like he flies the ship, and on top of that, he kind of has a command position. He's training essentially to become a commander. But he does have that engineering background as well. But that seems to be the third in the row. But at some point, he sort of starts becoming a little more engineer-oriented. And then, of course, some point he becomes the head engineer. And he really kind of veers away from that commander structure that he has. But then later on, after the show's over, we find out in Picard Season 3, that he really is kind of utilizes all of those traits. So I liked that he sort of went through those steps until he's really needed as the engineer, and he's got the brain for engineering. So, he moves into that location. But at this point, everyone's very at the beginning stages. I like Q. John Delancey, man, he's just a legend. His performance is amazing. I love it. I understand this episode can be a little bit long and a little bit cheesy because it's like the pilot and it's an hour. I love the episode still, though, because it introduces us to a lot of things. And it is a little clunky, but I also find the ending to be very satisfying, So John Delancey, they find out, the Q, they're this omnipotent being, god-like, and he's taking a human form to tell them that they're all a savage child race or something like that. And they're going to be put to court because put on trial for their inability to progress or whatever you want to say. So like you find that out, and Q sets that up, and they can't get away from that force field that's chasing them that he puts out there. One of the interesting things that I didn't think about later is the issues with this episode is that they immediately go to the battle bridge and separate the ship almost right away. Like their first thing is not to wait it out, see what happens, whatever. Immediately Picard is like, we're separating the ship to try to run away from this alien being. And one of the interesting things, but kind of issues with that was, okay, well now you've set the standard that whenever the ship is in trouble, it should separate, and that's what they'll do. But later on, they down the road, they're going to end up saying, like, should we separate the ship? And then Picard's like, no, not yet. I'm not, So they have to, like, almost downplay that it exists. Then eventually they just ignore that they can separate the ship. it probably would have been a better idea if they had redesigned the engines a bit, and they find out that they can do 2 warps faster, right? That they can go warp 10 or 11 or whatever it is. They can go warp 12 and 13 or something crazy, but they have to kind of refit the Enterprise, is the engine of the Enterprise. And in doing so, they'll have to eliminate the ability for it to separate the saucer section. But they've got to get somewhere in a certain amount of time, so they have to do this so they can go do that. And they could have made a whole episode about that. And so that would have kind of cleared up them ever being like, we're going to separate the saucer ever again. But it's fine. I find it okay that they just literally ignored it. That they were like, okay, can't separate the saucer. We're just never going to bring it up. It's fine with me. It's a little thing that doesn't bother me, but it is kind of funny. And they immediately go into separating the saucer. And I think they tried to make this episode this really, sell this as this big, exciting, 2-part episode. And I remember that, the writers and Gene Roddenberry, I think, just wanted to make one little episode, but the studio wanted it to be a longer episode, so they combined 2 episodes into one, and that's why this episode is kind of clunky and weird. But I like it still, and a part of that could be the nostalgia, but I like it. It plays like a long first episode, and I think it's fine. I think there's it's slower moving, and I think some people that get introduced to Star Trek: The Next Generation probably, will have more trouble with the first 2 seasons just because it's so 80s. But and then they start playing the opening theme and the music when they separate the saucer. It's kind of awesome, especially when you're a kid. When you're a 4 or 5-year-old kid watching this, and the music comes on and the ship starts separating. Like, I was pumped up, as a kid, and I'm 39 years old now, and for years, I would always, every couple of years, watch The Next Generation from seasons 1 to 7. But for years, I also would watch it every day and every night. So there were times where I'd be watching it every day and every night. And now in my older years, me and my wife always go to bed to The Next Generation. So I've seen all these episodes thousands of times. Probably. Tasha Yar and Worf are very emotional people. I don't know if you've ever noticed this about this show, but like Worf is always like, put the we'll bomb, we'll shoot them. Worf doesn't care. Worf is always trying to blow everything up. I never got that about Worf because humanity had progressed to this level of pacifism and progressiveness and logic and stuff like that. But Worf is always like, let's just kill them, like whatever. But he's a Klingon, so I guess that's different. But he was raised on Earth, so you would think he would be more. So he is like that. He is more like a human, but he still is Klingon. But Tasha Yar is also not from Earth either, and she's also quick to get kind of emotional and speak up and say, like, these people saved me, like, they're not bad, and you don't understand what you're talking about. And, she gets frozen by Q here, but she's okay, luckily, in this episode. As a kid, we meet Vigo the Carpathian. No, this is Groppler Zorn. And we finally meet Riker, and Riker is, I always love Riker, as a kid. And obviously Riker originally was supposed to be the captain, James T. Kirk of the Enterprise. Like, Picard was the older general-like leader, which was different, a lot different from Kirk for a lot of people, obviously. And Riker was kind of the younger version of Kirk, so they could still kind of do that sort of thing. He ends up kind of tempering off into something different, but in the beginning here, he was still supposed to be this sort of creeping on the ladies guy, but he's still like that. I love Riker. He's eating an apple. There's a mystery on the planet about how they're getting all this cool stuff, how the planet makes all this stuff. It kind of makes you think that they would just not even ever care about it. Who cares where they're getting anything? The planet just provides you with the stuff you want, and that's it. But they're suspicious at some point about the planet. And I kind of like this sci-fi story that plays out in Encounter from Far to Farpoint. I like how Riker watches, like, for some reason we need to catch Riker up on what happened. Now, they could have just said that I've been briefed on everything that happened, or they could have just said, sit down, number one, I've got a lot to talk to you about, and he could have been like, okay. And then they could have cut back to him just saying like, okay, so what do we do about this Q? That sort of thing. But I kind of like that they had this reactionary shot of him. I wish that they doctored up the footage a little bit, though. because it's so clearly they're watching the TV show here, by these edits. So, but a lot of TV shows at the time did this. They just took right from the show itself, and who cares? You get the idea. But it did take me out of it a little bit because I was always like, that's like literally what I watch. And where are all these cameras all over the ship? But no, it was kind of funny. Riker turns and he's like, calls that a little adventure. It was a little cheesy, but again, first episode, pilot, I like it. Then Picard kind of grills Riker. He's like, you refuse to let your captain beam down and all this other stuff. And, the fact that Riker holds to his merits is what Picard likes.
In my opinion, Sir, Altair 3 was too dangerous to risk exposing the captain.
I see. Captain's rank means nothing to you.
So Picard kind of puts him through a little bit of a test here. And Picard is way more rigid in these first episodes, which makes sense because, Picard knows he's got to take command and be the leader and be strong. And, he can't be crazy, but he is very sort of standoff. I'm in charge. I'm serious. And, over the years, Picard loosens up very quickly, actually. Even in this series, he loosens up. And it makes sense that, in the new Star Trek Picard Season 3, Picard is much more like loving and caring and whimsical. And a lot of people would say, man, it doesn't seem like the same Picard. And it really doesn't, but that's because everybody changes. He's not the same Picard at the end of Season 7 that he is at the beginning of Season 1. So, but, you can't help but want that kind of the more Picard you're used to. But he is more rigid. He's kind of playing games. Riker explaining how why he chose him for the job and all that sort of thing.
I don't feel comfortable with children. But since a captain needs an image of geniality, you're to see that's what I project.
Aye, sir.
Welcome to the Enterprise, Commander Riker.
And the biggest concern Captain Picard has is, looking stupid, looking bad, and being awkward around children. So he kind of puts Riker in charge of that. You take care of the kids' stuff. I'm serious in charge of this ship. And that's always been a thing with Picard about children, that he's uncomfortable. And Riker is kind of smiles at this point. Like, okay, wow, that was it. He kind of knows. He's, this gives him an outlook on what he's supposed to do, and he already starts to understand Captain Picard now because of this talk. And Picard sharing that personal information with him, sometimes you could see it as like threatening, or you could see it as, like in a bad way. But Riker doesn't seem to see it that way here. He sees it as the captain opening up to him in a friendly way. And so Riker, I believe, I don't know, I'll have to skip a scene here to see, but I think he smiles. Yeah, he looks down and he kind of smiles. Yeah, see, he's like, oh yeah, this is what we're doing. Just great stuff. I mean, he might smile too much. Look at that. Look at that smile by Riker, bro. He's like, yeah. It's kind of funny. And then Picard smiles back. I love it, man. Then we cut to Geordi's visor. And, of course, the visor, gave that really futuristic. It's like literally like a woman's barrettes or whatever they're called. I don't know what they are. The close up on the hair, and they covered it with something. Like, it looks so clunky, but it looks so like it really could be futuristic. Even now, to this day, that thing looks like it's futuristic. It's one of the things that stuck out to me as a kid watching the show. It's fairly simple, but it really does make you believe that there's these two things that punch into your brain, and then this allows the spectrum, to be seen. It's very cool. It's very cool. And quite honestly, in the future, we'll probably just have implants like Geordi does have later on. But I don't know, man. That visor was a big thing. When you see it, you know exactly the show we're talking about and what it is. And then, really cool treat when we get to see Dr. McCoy. For some reason, Dr. McCoy is now a deep Southern get off my lawn type of guy, but I don't know. He's like, boy, how you like this ship, boy. He's talking to Data, I don't know, man. But it was great that DeForest Kelley kind of ends the first part of the show. It's kind of cool. Also, we get the guys running around in dresses and stuff like that. Then we get a phenomenal scene where we're, kind of reintroduced to Data as Riker steps on a holodeck for what I think is the first time, or one of the first times he's stepped on such a big holodeck like this. And we're really kind of shown the power of the holodeck. Data's trying to whistle in the tree. Pop goes the weasel. Riker finishes it for him. One of the greatest lines ever in Star Trek that cracked me up when Data says, like, I would gladly give it all up to be human. And then Riker is like, nice to meet you, Pinocchio. Like, it's really a funny line to me. It's also funny to me when Data, right before that, when Data's like, do you think, Riker's like, do you think you're better than humans? And Data's like, well, in many ways I am better, superior in many ways. And then Riker's like, that does bother me. You think you're better than us? He's like, yeah, in many ways I am. And then he said, but I'd gladly give it up to be human. And Riker's like, nice to meet you, Pinocchio. And so the fact that Data, it's at first concerning to Riker. Like, damn, this guy, oh my God, this robot's going to try to take us over. He thinks he's better than everybody. That's a bit concerning, But then he finds out that, well, even though that's true, Data is better in many ways. Data is humble, though. And not only humble, but he aspires to want to actually be human. He doesn't want humans to be more like him and be perfect. He wants to be like humans. So that changes Riker's sort of outlook of like, I don't know about this, a robot, to kind of like, oh, that's actually nice. He's less threatening and less threatened because Data would rather be human, which, you could take that how you want, but.
I shall endeavor to function adequately, sir.
Yes.
And then they display some of Data's strength when Wesley steps on a loose rock and falls, and Data catches him and he pulls him up, and it's really cheesy again, super 80s, but displays Data's strength abilities. Then we go back to the promenade here, kind of on the planet. Beverly and everybody, some guys in dresses, and that's when Deanna starts to sense. By the way, smoking hot, but no, Deanna starts to sense, something's in pain here on this planet. And there's just this feeling of dread. It starts to take over in this episode, like darkness and dread. And you're like, oh my God, dude, what's going to happen here? And, the interaction with Groppler Zorn being tortured. And then Q shows up to try to, interfere again and say, like, you can't figure it out, Captain. You don't know what's going on. And they're like, get out of here, Q. We'll figure it out. And they do. And come to find out, the one of the aliens is being held on the planet by Groppler Zorn and those people, and it's enslaved. An alien being is enslaved on the planet to do work for them, to create all these things, and its partner comes back, and it's sad, and then bottom line, it's reunited with its partner in the end, and it's a very sci-fi but kind of beautiful story that goes from pain and suffering to gratitude. And, Q is there to witness it along the way and how the humans handle it and how Starfleet handles it. And, they end up doing the right thing, figuring it out, doing a good job. Groppler Zorn was tortured a bit. And I liked the story. It was very hopeful. It was beautiful. It people would probably go on to say it had like sort of like slavery points or whatever, but just anything, animal, whatever you want to make it. The bottom line is it's reuniting lovers, reuniting family against somebody who is entrapping it, encaging it, and whatever. It was just a very it's a very nice, I thought, story, a nice ending to the story. One of the high points of the episode is the conclusion here, of what happens. And so everything kind of ends well.
Do you use other life forms for your recreation?
If so, you've not provided the best.
Leave us! We've passed your little test.
Temperament.
And, Picard's irritated with Q.
Capitan.
Get off my ship.
That's great, man. Get off my ship. I like it. And the first reaction with Q is so hostile here, and because they're not really sure about him, but they know he's kind of a bit of a trickster. Right away, Picard, he's a great reader of personality, and you would think that this being this crazy godlike being that Picard wouldn't really know how to read him, but he is readable because he acts, for a godlike creature, he acts very human. So Picard is kind of able to read that. Whether you want to call that a flaw in the show and the writing and things, I don't know, but Picard's able to read him because he's actually very human-like.
I do so only because it suits me to leave. I will not promise never to appear again.
So then they find out, okay, we'll probably hear from him again. And as Q reappears throughout the seasons, he's less hostile every single time, and clearly becomes fond of the crew, humans, and especially Picard. And then it's a good starting point. He's supposed to be this sort of the villain and the nemesis in a way, but he really ends up being a friend. So that is my really fast sort of breakdown of Encounter at Farpoint. And again, like I said, because I grew up with the episode and I've seen it so many times, I really liked the episode. And I would give the episode, I'll rank it the same way I rank Strange New Worlds and some of those other Star Trek episodes, right? Now, and all Star Trek, right? But I also will say that there is a bit of nostalgia coming from me. So I may rank this show higher than maybe you do or maybe other people would because, I just really like the show. So I would give Encounter at Farpoint a 6.5 out of 10. Anything above a 6 is a thumbs up from me. And but we typically like to be in the 7, 8, 9, and 10 category, but I would give this a 6.5 from beginning to end. It's a little bit long. It's got a lot of cheese in it. It's got a lot of good introductions. It's got a very 80s and dated vibe compared to what the show would become around seasons 3 and up. But I really enjoy it, and I do watch it. It's not one of the ones like if you put in a top 20, probably it wouldn't be in my top 20, but it's an episode that I do have to revisit every year, or probably I've watched it twice this year already, if not 3 or 4 times, because I just leave TNG on at night all the time. Worf still has the old school sash there, doesn't have the new cool one. There's a lot of budget stuff in the first couple of seasons of the show. But Encounter at Farpoint, guys, what do you think about the episode? What are your feelings about it? When did you see it? How do you feel about it now versus when you first saw it? Leave me feelings down below about it, and we'll talk to you later, man. I hope you guys subscribe, and I will. If you guys like this, I'm gonna do every episode. I'm gonna do every episode. This is Star Trek Late Night. Leave a comment, and if you really love what I do, please think about helping and drop a super thanks below, or go to paypal.me/Joe Cronin Show and send me something directly there because I'm poor, but in the future there'll be no money. So let's hope we get there soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And at the very least, leave a like and tell your friends. See you later.